Have you ever had the feeling that there's something beyond what the eyes can see, as if invisible layers were hiding behind reality, just waiting for consciousness to reach them? And what if I told you that Jesus, before being the symbol of Christian faith, was a spiritual navigator among these hidden dimensions, and that the so-called seven heavens are not just celestial metaphors, but real maps of the human soul in search of ascension? Throughout history, religions and mystical traditions have spoken about multiple heavens, planes of existence stacked like invisible steps of creation. However, few times have these levels been explored with the audacity that arises when we investigate the apocryphal, Gnostic, and esoteric texts of early Christianity. It is at this point that the Codex of the Seven Heavens emerges as a lost key, a hidden piece in the puzzle of human awakening and of the real mission of Jesus on earth. The canonical gospel offers a linear and didactic view of Christ's life, but behind this structure, there are traces of profound mystical experiences, spiritual journeys, and altered states of consciousness that many modern scholars dare to connect to ancient traditions of ascension. After all, why would Jesus isolate himself in the desert for 40 days? What really happened on top of the mountain during the Transfiguration? And what does in fact his final elevation into the clouds after the resurrection mean? These moments, treated as miracles or symbols, can be understood as milestones of an interdimensional journey, a subtle and powerful path that the Master of Masters traveled to access wisdoms that did not belong to this plane. The seven heavens, in this context, are not distant places, but vibrational layers of the being. Each heaven, a frequency. Each step, an internal achievement. In the oldest Jewish writings, particularly in mystical traditions such as the Merkabah and the Kabbalah, we find vivid descriptions of seven heavens inhabited by angels, guardians, and thrones of glory. They speak of soul journeys, guided by light and sound, until reaching the presence of the unnameable. Jesus, coming from a people deeply immersed in these traditions, grew up among stories and visions of this hidden world. He not only knew these narratives, he lived and taught by them. But why has all this been silenced? Why has institutionalized doctrine left these teachings aside? The answer may lie in the fear of inner power. When we understand that the seven heavens represent layers of spiritual awakening that each being can access, the entire external hierarchical structure begins to lose control. The true temple, as Jesus said, is not made with human hands, and the kingdom is within you. This message is profoundly liberating and dangerously transformative. Upon opening the Codex of the Seven Heavens, we begin to see Jesus not only as a being who preached love, but as one who navigated subtle realities with mastery. He transgressed the boundaries between worlds, between the visible and the invisible, between the human and the divine. Not to distance himself from humanity, but to pave a way back to the origin, a luminous return to the center of everything. In practice, each heaven represents a stage of inner elevation, from the densest world to the most subtle, from ignorance to enlightenment. And Jesus would have passed through these levels with full awareness, leaving traces of this journey in parables, miracles, and enigmatic teachings. His silence before Pilate, his seclusion before the cross, his words on the Mount, all of these, clues of a journey that went far beyond the surface. By understanding this journey, we stop seeing Jesus merely as a figure to be worshipped and start recognizing him as a master who invites us to make the same journey. The seven heavens then become a map of the soul, an invisible ladder that rises within each of us. And the Codex, even though hidden from the world's eyes, is etched in our essence, waiting to be deciphered. This revelation changes everything. It invites us to reassess not only Jesus' role, but also ours. What we call a miracle may in fact be a forgotten spiritual technology. What we call faith may just be the first step of an internal alchemical process, where density dissolves into light and man rediscovers the God within himself. Now that we've opened this first door and the fog begins to clear, a question forcefully imposes itself. If the seven heavens exist, where else have they been mentioned? And what else is hidden in the ancient writings, silently ignored through the centuries? Long before the idea of heaven was reduced to a static paradise reserved for the righteous, the original concept of the heavens in early Jewish and Christian texts was something much more dynamic, mystical, and stratified. The seven heavens did not emerge as poetic figures, but as spiritual realities with distinct hierarchies, functions, and purposes. As we unravel these ancient traditions, what we find is not just theology, but a detailed spiritual map passed down from generation to generation among the initiated. In the Jewish writings of the intertestamental period, that silent interval between the Old and New Testament, emerges a deeply symbolic literature, often overlooked by the official canons. Texts such as the Book of the Secrets of Enoch and the Apocalypse of Abraham describe in detail these multiple heavens. Each one has unique characteristics. Some are realms of light and music, others hold the records of souls. There are those inhabited by warrior angels, and even those that contain the judgments of the Most High. Enoch, for example, is taken in spirit by a guiding angel and led through all seven heavenly levels, a journey that resonates deeply with what we will see in the life of Jesus. These accounts were not unfamiliar to the people of Jesus' time. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and many other groups had distinct views on life after death and the higher realms. The Essenes, in particular, a group many scholars believe Jesus was deeply connected with, preserved advanced spiritual practices that included prolonged fasting, states of meditative silence, visualizations, and coded prayers. All of this was done with the purpose of purifying the body and mind for the elevation of the soul to the higher heavens. Furthermore, it's essential to understand that the symbolic language of the Gospels was not a coincidence. Jesus spoke through parables not only to make his teachings accessible, but also to protect profound spiritual truths from those who were not ready to receive them. This is especially clear when, in various passages, he says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." It was a subtle invitation to those who were seeking more than words, those who were willing to pierce through the veils of appearance to touch the essence. In early Christianity, before the institutionalization of Rome, the diversity of thought was vast. There were those known as Gnostics, who viewed the physical world as a state of spiritual separation, and saw in Jesus the messenger of a hidden path back to the divine. For these groups, the seven heavens were vibrational levels that the soul needed to cross, freeing itself from the shackles of ego, fear, and ignorance. Salvation, therefore, was not an external event, it was an inner initiatory journey. Interestingly, St. Paul, a central figure in the New Testament, mentions in his letter to the Corinthians having been caught up to the third heaven. This detail is often overlooked, but it provides us with evidence that the concept of multiple heavens was alive among the early Christians. The absence of a greater explanation in the text perhaps indicates that this knowledge was shared orally or kept within more closed circles. The mere fact that Paul mentions this naturally shows how much this spiritual structure was part of the backdrop of that time. The codices found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, also reinforce this view. There lie manuscripts that had been buried by Gnostic monks to escape the destruction imposed by orthodoxy. In them, Christ is not just a savior, but a spiritual instructor, a guide between worlds, who teaches the way back to the higher heavens through gnosis, the direct knowledge of the divine, obtained through inner experience, and not by blind faith. It is within this context that the figure of Jesus expands. He does not emerge isolated in his mission, but as someone who mastered a spiritual science, transmitted by much older traditions. His constant practice of climbing mountains, retreating into solitude, and staying in meditation shows us that he was consciously following a path of connection with higher realms. The Lord's Prayer, when it says, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," is a hidden key. It suggests that there is a possible alignment between the worlds, a fusion of dimensions that can be experienced by those who become one with the Father. Even baptism, a ritual so central to churches, takes on a new meaning in light of this knowledge. It was more than a symbol of purification. It was a spiritual rite of passage, an energetic activation that allowed the soul to begin its journey through the inner heavens. John the Baptist, considered the precursor of Christ, was described as someone who prepared the way, and this way was one of ascension, of transcendence. This perspective invites us to see Jesus as a master of spiritual initiations, a being who deeply understood what lay behind the veils of matter. He spoke with authority because he had lived these realities. His teachings, often coded, became keys only for those who were ready. That's why many followed him without fully understanding him, for his words were seeds planted in the soul, waiting to mature over time. Now that we understand the vastness of the traditions surrounding the seven heavens in the time of Jesus, the next step is to look beyond the Judeo-Christian world. Did other cultures also perceive these levels of reality? Could it be that somehow the same spiritual map was accessed by completely different peoples, proving that this truth does not belong to one religion, but to the very structure of human consciousness? If the seven heavens were merely a Judeo-Christian dogma, we could treat them as part of a culturally localized theology. But what we see when we look honestly at the great spiritual traditions of humanity is something far more powerful, a universal pattern, an archetypal echo that emerges in different times, with different names, but with the same hidden essence, the idea of multiple heavens, higher planes, vibrational spheres that the soul can ascend. In Islam, for example, Muhammad's journey to the heavens, known as Isra and Miraj, is one of the most profoundly mystical and revealing episodes of the Islamic faith. According to tradition, the Prophet was taken by an angel from the city of Mecca to Jerusalem, and from there he ascended through seven heavens, encountering prophets at each level: Adam in the first, Jesus and John in the second, Joseph in the third, and so on, until he reached the seventh heaven, where he met God. This narrative, filled with symbolism, suggests that the heavens are indeed distinct layers of spiritual reality. Interestingly, this view directly resonates with accounts found in Jewish and Christian esoteric texts. Hinduism, with its metaphysical vastness, also presents a cosmology of multiple planes. The Vedic texts speak of lokas, dimensional realms ranging from the densest to the subtlest, such as Bhuloka, earthly plane, Svargaloka, heaven, and even Satyaloka, the highest plane, where Brahma, the creator, resides. Each of these realms is interconnected, and the soul transitions between them according to its karma and evolution. These are not physical spaces but states of being, of frequency, a truth parallel to the seven heavens that resonates with striking synchronicity. In the ancestral shamanism of the Americas, accounts from healers and visionaries also point to a structure of multiple worlds. There is the lower world, the middle world, and the upper world, with subdivisions that often reach up to 7 levels. During ceremonies with sacred plants such as ayahuasca or peyote, shamans access parallel realities where they meet with spirits, power animals, and archetypal consciousnesses. These are journeys guided by intention and purity, where the soul crosses portals to learn, heal, and evolve. Once again, we find the idea of spiritual ascension through layers of perception. Even in Buddhist cosmology, especially in the Tibetan branch, we find the so-called realms of existence, divided into forms and levels of consciousness. The tradition of the Bardo Thodol, known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes the stages through which the soul passes after death, traversing visions and experiences that reflect its own internal states. Each of these phases is like a temporary heaven or hell, a reality shaped by the mind and its vibrations. These parallels cannot be dismissed as mere coincidence. The recurring emergence of the structure of multiple heavens in geographically separated cultures, and sometimes millennia apart, points to something deeper, a shared ancestral knowledge, perhaps inherited from a common spiritual origin, or accessed directly by masters who have learned to decipher the codes of consciousness. In addition to institutionalized religions, esoteric traditions such as theosophy, spiritual alchemy, and Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy also explore this structure of the higher worlds. Theosophy, for example, divides the planes of existence into physical, astral, mental, Buddhic, and even atmic levels, all interpenetrating, each with its own frequency and laws. Meanwhile, Steiner spoke of 7 planetary spheres of soul development, aligned with the spiritual progress of humanity throughout the ages. The recurrence of the number 7 is not random. 7 colors in the visible spectrum, 7 notes in the musical scale, 7 chakras in the human subtle body, 7 days of the week. In the Pythagorean tradition, 7 was seen as the number of totality, the integration between the material world, 4 elements, and the spiritual world, divine trinity, a number that represents the passage between the visible and the invisible. Heaven, then, is not a place, but a harmony. Upon seeing this mystical symmetry between cultures, we realize that the 7 heavens do not belong to a religion, but to the language of the soul. They are universal stages of human awakening. Each culture, in its own way, translated into symbols what their wise men experienced in expanded states of consciousness. They saw, lived, and returned to teach. Jesus, then, was not alone in this journey. He was part of a spiritual lineage that knew true ascension begins within. His body, as the esoteric tradition tells us, was a living temple, and his soul, a bridge between worlds. When he spoke of the kingdom of God, perhaps he was referring to these very realms that so many other masters also glimpsed. And the difference? He fully lived all of them and came back to show us the way. With this broader understanding, the next step in our investigation is to look at the accounts of Jesus' life through a new lens. What if those biblical passages considered miraculous are, in fact, coded records of real spiritual journeys? That's what we're going to unravel now. For centuries, the Gospels have been read as sacred chronicles of supernatural events, attributed to an extraordinary man sent by God. But what if part of what we call miracles is, in fact, the reflection of a profound spiritual mastery, accessed through inner practices and expanded states of consciousness? What if Jesus' journeys to the deserts, mountains, and even to the invisible world are literally crossings between dimensions? What tradition calls wonder may actually be a forgotten spiritual science. And Jesus, far from acting as an exception, might have been the greatest example of what every human being is capable of achieving when awakened. It all begins with the desert. Before starting his ministry, Jesus retreats for 40 days and 40 nights. This number is not literal. It's archetypal, representing a complete cycle of purification and rebirth. In the desert, he fasts, silences, and faces the temptations, which symbolize the internal tests every initiate encounters when seeking higher planes. There, he comes into contact with the dense forces of ego, doubt, illusion, and transcends them. This period aligns with practices found in spiritual traditions all over the world, where isolation, fasting, and silence are methods to alter the mind's frequency and elevate the state of perception. Shortly after this episode, Jesus begins to show clear signs of mastery over laws that govern more than the physical plane. He heals with a touch, walks on water, multiplies food, reads thoughts, controls the wind, and even resurrects the dead. If viewed through the lens of spiritual quantum physics, a growing field that studies the power of consciousness over matter, these feats are not violations of nature, but actions performed by someone who has learned to operate above the laws of the three-dimensional world. Jesus accessed subtle layers of reality, altering them from the inside out. But there are even more evident moments of his interaction with the spiritual heavens. One of them is the Transfiguration, where he ascends a mountain with 3 disciples, and before them his body transforms into light. His face shines like the sun, and his garments become radiant. In this state, Jesus converses with Moses and Elijah, two spiritual masters who have passed away. What we are witnessing here is not just a vision, but a conscious access to another dimension. A portal opens, and he transitions between worlds, revealing to those who were ready that the barrier between the physical and the spiritual is thin and can be crossed. Another enigmatic event is the resurrection of Lazarus. Jesus waits 4 days before going to the tomb, a symbolic number of the physical world and matter. Upon arrival, he not only calls for Lazarus with authority, but performs a summoning that breaks the barrier between planes. Lazarus's body returns to life, but according to esoteric traditions, his soul would have been guided back from the astral plane. Jesus knew how to navigate this threshold, and his word vibrated beyond sound. It was a frequency capable of realigning matter to spirit. The resurrection of Jesus after crucifixion is perhaps the greatest testament to this interdimensional dominion. When he reappears to the disciples, he does so with a transformed body. He passes through closed doors, appears and disappears suddenly, and is recognized not by physical appearance, but by the vibration of his presence. This is the body of light, the body of glory, cited in various mystical traditions. It is not merely a biological return, but an ascension of vibrational density. Jesus not only overcame death, he transcended the material world and returned by conscious will as a guide. There is also the enigmatic episode of the Ascension when, after 40 days, he ascends to the heavens before the eyes of the disciples. Again, the number 40, a cycle of transformation. The ascent to the heavens is not just a metaphor for returning to the Father, but a clear representation of the final stage of his journey among the 7 heavens. By ascending, Jesus completes the initiatory route of the soul, from earth to the divine throne. And most importantly, he leaves a promise. "In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you." Each of these mansions, as suggested by ancient traditions, is one of the higher heavens, levels of consciousness and evolution. These experiences, seen by many as divine, can be understood as lucid access to higher planes, and they do not emerge from nowhere. Jesus prepares for each of them. He prays in solitude, meditates intensely, fasts, climbs mountains, ancestral rituals that alter the energy field and align the body with the spirit. Nothing is done by chance. Each miracle is preceded by introspection, silence, connection. This shows us that his journey was not magical, but deeply conscious and methodical. Furthermore, the disciples themselves give indications that they were familiar with these states. After Pentecost, they perform healings, speak in tongues, have visions, walk among invisible crowds. What Jesus taught them was not just morality, it was how to access the invisible worlds. Early Christianity was, at its core, a school of mysteries, of initiations. Christ was the master and the apostles, apprentices of a sacred science that has been erased over the centuries. Upon realizing this, we understand that Jesus' journeys were not only external. He did not just walk between villages, he walked between worlds. And every step he took, every word he said, every gesture he made, was imbued with interdimensional wisdom. When he said, "I am the way," perhaps he was not just talking about a philosophy, but a literal route between the heavens, which he tread and invited us to follow. The question now becomes inevitable. What clues has he left in the Gospels and in forgotten texts that reveal the secrets of this path? How can we ourselves access these dimensions? The key might be in a gospel that was left out of the Bible, but which preserves some of the deepest and most transformative statements that Jesus ever made. The kingdom is within you and outside of you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. With these words, the Gospel of Thomas confronts us with a truth that challenges millennia of indoctrination. Unlike the canonical Gospels, Thomas does not present miracles, nor a chronological narrative of Jesus' life. It is a collection of 114 sayings, direct attributions of Jesus, recorded by one of his quietest disciples. And what makes this gospel so impactful is precisely this. It offers us a deeply inward Christ, a master of consciousness who points not outward, but inward. Discovered in 1945 in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, alongside other Gnostic texts, the Gospel of Thomas remained hidden for centuries, perhaps intentionally, due to its incendiary nature. In it, Jesus is not presented as the sole Savior, but as someone who reveals the divine spark that already dwells within each one of us. He does not promise a future kingdom, but asserts, repeatedly, that this kingdom is accessible here and now, in silence, in attention, in the recognition of what we are beyond the body and name. This gospel does not deal with external events, but with internal states. It is a coded map of the soul, a code to access subtler levels of reality. When Jesus says, for example, if they ask you, "What is the sign of your Father in you?" tell them, it is a movement and a rest. He is pointing to the paradox that is only understood in deep meditation, a state where everything moves, but there is a presence that remains still, the eternal self that observes. Many scholars believe that the Gospel of Thomas represents a tradition closer to the original oral teachings of Jesus. It would be less contaminated by later theology and more aligned with the mystical practices of the early Christians. Here, Jesus acts as an initiatory guide, leading the disciple beyond appearances, teaching him to become aware of his own inner light. When you make the two one, and the inside like the outside, then you will enter the kingdom. This is not an innocent metaphor. It is a direct instruction of spiritual alchemy. This message is frightening. It shatters the need for intermediaries, dismantles centralized authority, and returns to the individual the responsibility and power to awaken. That's why it was silenced. Because an awakened being is uncontrollable. A being who knows they are a child of the living Father does not bow to guilt, fear, or dogma. And Jesus in this gospel is not looking for worshipers. He seeks the awakened. The notion that the kingdom of God is within you has been softened over the centuries. Interpreted as something symbolic or overly spiritualized, it was dehydrated from its original potency. But when read in the light of mystical experience, this phrase reveals itself as a key. The kingdom is a state of consciousness, and by affirming that it is both within and outside of us, Jesus dissolves the separation between the internal and external world. He invites us to see reality with new eyes, awakened eyes. The Gospel of Thomas also emphasizes self-knowledge as the path. He who knows himself is worthy of the world. This call echoes the wisdom of Socrates, but with an even more intimate force. It is not enough to think about oneself. One must live the truth that is discovered. This knowing oneself that Jesus speaks of is not psychological. It is transcendental. It is the direct recognition that we are not the body, nor the thoughts. We are consciousness, divine essence, an extension of the Father. There is a particularly revealing passage. If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, "Move," and it will move. This widely known saying takes on a new layer of meaning in Thomas. It's not just about belief, but about a vibrational state. The faith here is inner knowledge. It's when consciousness aligns in such a way with the whole that the external world bends to pure intention. It's a direct description of the functioning of quantum reality, where the observer shapes the object. Thomas reveals a Jesus profoundly different from the one in churches. He is a master who challenges, provokes, silences. He does not offer cheap comfort, but invites to a journey. He asserts, "Whoever seeks, finds. And when they find, they are disturbed. And when they are disturbed, they marvel. And then they will reign." This is the path: to seek, to find, to be destabilized, and then to transcend. Awakening is not linear. It is an earthquake in the soul, which dismantles everything before rebuilding. When studying this gospel, it becomes clear that the seven heavens are not an external system to be reached after death. They are levels of the self, layers of perception, states of the soul on its return to the One. Each of Jesus' teachings is a password, a vibration, a ladder. And the first step is silence. Inner listening, looking inward, the courage to see oneself without masks. This vision transforms the relationship with the divine, no longer as subjects of a distant God, but as individual flames of an eternal bonfire. The Father, as Jesus used to say, is not on a physical throne in the heavens. He is in the awakened heart. And the kingdom, so often sought outside, has always been where few dared to look, in the deepest part of themselves. Now that we have these inner keys at hand, the next step is to look at the forgotten codices that, alongside Thomas, were buried and silenced for centuries. These texts hold secrets about the seven heavens, about Jesus' initiations, and about the true power that was bequeathed to us. In 1945, on the sands of Upper Egypt, near the village of Nag Hammadi, a peasant named Muhammad Ali al-Saman made a discovery that would shake the foundations of traditional Christianity. In a cave sealed for centuries, he found a clay jar containing leather-bound manuscripts. These were ancient codices, carefully hidden by the monks of the region, with the purpose of protecting sacred texts from imminent destruction caused by the officialization of Roman Christianity. What did these texts contain? Revelations of a cosmic Christ, of hidden dimensions, of spiritual portals and the soul's journey through the seven heavens, a narrative that radically contrasts with the simplified doctrine that prevailed for centuries. These manuscripts, known today as the Nag Hammadi Library, contain over 50 texts, many of them linked to Gnosticism, a mystical and philosophical branch of early Christianity that prioritized self-knowledge as a means of salvation. Within these texts, we find titles such as the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Philip, the Treatise on the Resurrection, the Apocryphon of John, and the Hypostasis of the Archons. Each of these documents presents profound layers of spiritual teachings that had been deemed heretical by religious authorities in the 4th century, but now re-emerge as incredibly sophisticated spiritual maps. In the Apocryphon of John, for example, we are introduced to an expansive cosmology, where the pre-existing Christ descends through the celestial spheres to liberate the divine spark imprisoned in humanity. The seven heavens are described as realms ruled by entities called archons, intermediary forces that keep the soul bound to the illusion of separation. Jesus, in this view, is not just a prophet, but an emissary from a kingdom above these heavens, coming to show how to overcome the limitations imposed by these dimensional guardians. What is found in these texts is a spirituality that invites inner boldness. They speak of a truth not taught, but discovered, a secret knowledge, or rather sacred, that requires direct experience, not just blind acceptance. The Gnostic does not believe to be saved. He seeks, plunges, and awakens. The codices present symbolic rituals, purification processes, states of consciousness that align us with the divine, not as lesser creatures but as sparks of the Creator himself. In the Gospel of Philip, for example, Jesus is portrayed not as someone separate from others, but as the model of what everyone can become. He is the one who knew the truth and therefore became free. The passages of this gospel speak of a sacred union between the masculine and the feminine within the human being, an internal reintegration that awakens the body of light. There, baptism is seen as a real rebirth, a vibrational gateway, and the Eucharist as a fusion of spiritual states. Far from symbolic rituals, these are energetic events of inner activation. The Hypostasis of the Archons, another key text, describes the archons as entities created by a lower consciousness, which dominate the material world with laws of separation, fear, and ignorance. According to this gospel, Spiritual awakening consists of traversing these forces with clarity, reclaiming the original power of the soul. And this is where Jesus manifests as a liberator, not to intercede for us before an angry God, but to remind us who we are, extensions of the One, children of light, forgotten navigators in dense seas. These texts shed light on what possibly were the true esoteric teachings of Jesus. They point to an experiential spirituality, where the believer is not just a follower, but a learner of their own truth. And it is precisely for this reason that such gospels were banned. Because an awakened being does not need dogma. An awakened being walks firmly, connected to the source. The question that inevitably arises is, why were these truths hidden? The answer lies in the history of the Church. When Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine, it was necessary to consolidate a uniform creed, which would politically unify the empire. The councils of Nicaea, Ephesus, and Chalcedon defined what should be considered orthodox, and everything else was condemned as heresy. The Nag Hammadi texts, therefore, were buried as an act of resistance, a testimony to what could not be erased. But time has its wisdom. These texts, preserved by the silence of the sand, now find ears and hearts prepared to receive them. They speak of a Christ who invites us to the direct experience of the divine, of a path that crosses the seven heavens as stages of the soul in its reintegration with the source, and they put us face to face with the choice, to continue living under the veil of illusion, or to begin, like Jesus, the journey of return. What makes this revelation even more powerful is its relevance. We are living in an age of collective awakening. The truth that once had to hide in clay jars can now be transmitted on digital waves, reaching consciousnesses that are thirsty for something more, for something that resonates not just with the mind, but with the spirit. The Codex of the seven heavens is alive. It breathes in every forgotten teaching, in every rediscovered manuscript, in every soul that begins to remember. Now that we understand that the Nag Hammadi manuscripts reveal a vibrational path of ascension through the hidden heavens, the next step is to understand what the vehicle is that allows such a crossing. How did Jesus traverse these realities? How can we do the same? Among the great mysteries preserved in the spiritual traditions of the world, few are as powerful and as misunderstood as the concept of the light body. This body, also referred to as the body of glory, spiritual body, or Merkabah in the mystical Jewish tradition, is not a poetic symbol, but rather an energetic reality, a subtle structure that allows consciousness to transit between dimensional planes. And it is in this that the most hidden secret of Jesus' ascension resides, and perhaps the deepest destiny of humanity itself. In biblical accounts, we find scattered clues about this transformed body. After the resurrection, Jesus appears among the disciples, but not in the same way as before. He enters rooms with closed doors, disappears before their eyes, is mistaken for a gardener, and is only recognized by his energy. His body no longer responds to the laws of ordinary physics. He is no longer confined to the space-time of the third dimension. He ascended, and what we see is his luminous emanation, the fully activated light body. But what is, in fact, this body? In simple terms, it is an energy matrix that exists in all of us. It is the original pattern of the soul, the divine model of the human being before the fall into density. It is the body that Adam would have possessed before being expelled from Eden, according to Gnostic interpretations. This body does not get sick, does not die, does not wear out. It vibrates at a different frequency, and to activate it, it requires more than faith. It requires practice, intention, purification, and expansion of consciousness. In Jewish mysticism, especially in the Merkabah tradition, which literally means chariot of light, or divine chariot, we find detailed descriptions of visionaries being transported by this vehicle through the seven heavens. Ezekiel, for instance, has a vision in which he is carried by wheels within wheels, full of eyes, driven by angelic beings. Although enigmatic, this image represents the activation of the subtle body, guided by higher vibrations. Practitioners of this tradition knew that the soul needs a specific vehicle to travel through realms beyond the physical. In the esoteric schools of early Christianity, Jesus was seen as the model of the being who fully reconstructed his body of light. Each stage of his life, every miracle, each spiritual retreat, was part of an alchemical process. He refined his energy field, transmuted dense emotions, aligned his inner layers. The crucifixion, viewed by many as a tragedy, is understood by these currents as the final initiatory rite, the moment when the old body completely dissolves and the new incorruptible one emerges. Eastern traditions also offer powerful glimpses of this truth. In Tibetan Buddhism, we have the concept of the rainbow body, which occurs when a practitioner reaches such a high level of enlightenment that their physical body literally dissolves into light. There are documented accounts of masters who, upon dying, leave behind only hair and nails. The rest of the body simply disappears into luminosity. This is not mythology. It is the expression of a vibrational body that replaces the material body, something deeply aligned with what is described about the resurrected body of Christ. Even in the tradition of medieval alchemists, who encoded their teachings in symbols and metaphors, we find the quest for the philosopher's stone, which represents nothing less than the activation of the immortal body. The great work was not to transform lead into gold, but to transmute the ego into divine essence. It was an internal process, a refinement of the being, until it became transparent to the light of origin. The body of light was the final product of true alchemy. What all these traditions affirm in unison is that the human being is not limited to the flesh body. Within us exists a second body, made of pure light, connected to the source. And activating it is both a challenge and a calling. It requires inner vigilance, silence, spiritual practice, vibrational nourishment, conscious breathing, and above all, surrender to the divine. The light body responds to love, truth, and pure intention. It expands with forgiveness, compassion, and presence. And what is the role of this body in the seven heavens? Absolutely central. Each heaven is a frequency. To traverse these realms, one must vibrate in harmony with them. The body of light is the vibrational passport, the vehicle that withstands density and aligns with higher harmony. Jesus, in ascending, demonstrated that this journey is real and within reach of those who walk with living faith, not just in words, but in vibration. This knowledge was systematically concealed. The system doesn't want people to know that they harbor within themselves an eternal body, a being that doesn't rely on religions, external rituals, nor intermediaries, because this knowledge empowers, and an empowered being transforms the world with their mere presence. Like Jesus, who without weapons, without a throne and without armies, shook empires, simply because his light was as real as the sun. The body of light is therefore the link between earth and the heavens. It is the bridge. It is the living promise that we were not made for death, but for transcendence. It is the temple not made by human hands, which Jesus so often announced. And it is not outside. It is right now in every cell, in every breath of life. Sleeping, waiting, ready to awaken. In the next part, we will move away from the mystical and turn our gaze inward. If Jesus tread this path, what did he leave as a guide for each of us to do the same? How do we access our own heavens? How do we awaken, in the midst of life, the journey that many only think exists after death? Behind all the holy scriptures, mystical visions, miracles, and ascensions, there is a profound truth that unites all seekers. The journey is not upward, it's inward. What we call heavens, dimensions, higher realms, are internal states of the soul that unfold as we peel back the layers of ego, illusion, and fear. Jesus did not come just to demonstrate unique spiritual power. He came to remind us of the path that each of us can tread. And this path is encoded not outside of us, but in the frequencies of our consciousness. When Jesus said, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect," he was not imposing an impossible burden on us. He was revealing our origin. The perfection he referred to was not moral or behavioral. It was the purity of being in alignment with the Source. And to achieve this harmony, we need to understand that self-knowledge is not optional. It is essential. The heavens do not open for those who merely wait. They open for those who seek deeply, with presence, and with courage. This search, however, does not require isolation in mountains or deserts. The inner journey can, and should, occur in everyday life. Each moment we choose love over judgment, listening over reactivity, presence over distraction. We take a step towards these hidden heavens. Each conscious choice aligns us with higher levels of reality. And this completely transforms life because we start to live no longer from the personality, but from the essence. Jesus did not create a religion. He opened a portal for direct access to the divine reality. He said, "I am the door." And this door is in the heart of every human being, but it can only be crossed with humility and truth. When we acknowledge our shadows and lights, when we stop running from ourselves and start listening to ourselves, the code begins to be activated. The light turns on, the frequency changes, and the first veils begin to fall. The inner code is silent. It doesn't shout, it doesn't impose, it whispers. Therefore, one must learn to silence the noise of the world to hear it. Contemplative prayer, meditation, emotional fasting, radical forgiveness. These are practical tools that align our field with the inner heavens. The fasting that Jesus practiced, for example, was not just about food. It was a renunciation of attachments that prevent light from flowing. When we give up pride, the need for control, the desire for approval or to be approved, we make room for the divine to manifest. The code also reveals itself in the cycles of life. The pains, the losses, the challenges, all of them are disguised portals. Each fall contains the seed of a rise. When Jesus fell under the weight of the cross, it wasn't weakness, it was surrender. He showed us that even the deepest pain can be transformed into a portal of light. Every suffering faced with awareness becomes a step. Every darkness embraced with faith transforms into heaven. This code does not ask us for perfection. It asks for presence. It does not demand holiness in the religious sense. It asks for truth. The truth of who we are, here and now, with everything we carry. When we accept this call, when we stop identifying ourselves only with the body, with the name, with the roles we play, something in us begins to awaken. And this awakening is irreversible. There's no going back to sleep after seeing the light. Jesus said, "Whoever wants to come after me, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me." Many have interpreted this as a call to suffering, but denying oneself here means renouncing the false self. Taking up the cross is to carry with dignity your own process of transformation, and following Christ is to courageously live the path of awareness, even when it requires going through dark nights. He didn't promise comfort, he promised truth, and the truth sets you free. Each of us carries a divine spark, but this spark needs space to become fire. And space is only created when we dissolve internal barriers, resentments, guilt, fears, lies. By doing this, we begin to radiate, and it is this light that allows us to walk among the heavens, not as a reward, but as a natural reflection of our vibrational state. Ascension is a consequence of integration. In practice, this means living with consistency, thinking, feeling, speaking, and acting in alignment. Each time we break this alignment, we descend a step. Each time we restore this consistency, we ascend. The seven heavens, in this sense, are 7 levels of inner consistency, 7 stages of alignment with the true self. Jesus traversed them not to exclude us, but to invite us. And now, The invitation is personal. We are facing a choice: to remain on the surface of life or to dive in, to continue being driven by external winds or to take the helm of our inner vessel. Christ no longer walks among us in physical form, but his vibration lives on, and it responds to our intention. When we call with an open heart, this presence manifests, not to entertain us with miracles, but to remind us of who we are. In the next and final part of this journey, we will bring together everything we have learned to understand how Christ consciousness directly connects to abundance, not just spiritual, but also material. The last heaven is integration. It's where spirit and matter dance together. And that's what Jesus came to teach us, that heaven is not above. It begins within and manifests around. Throughout our spiritual journey, we have often been conditioned to believe that abundance is a test or an obstacle, that true spirituality requires scarcity, renunciation, and suffering. But Jesus, the same master who fasted in the desert, who lived among the poor, who washed the feet of his disciples, also multiplied loaves, transmuted water into wine, fished coins from the sea, and promised life in abundance. What he shows us with his actions is that spirituality does not deny the material. On the contrary, it elevates it, heals it, and transfigures it. The abundance that Jesus manifests is not accumulation. It's flow. It's a vibrational state where the divine expresses itself without barriers. When he multiplies the food, he is not just satisfying physical hunger. He is revealing that, by aligning with the higher laws of consciousness, creation expands from within outwards. There is no limit to the source. Scarcity is born from separation, fear, and the belief in lack. But the one who dwells in the heavens, within oneself, manifests what is necessary with wisdom, love, and purpose. This is the multidimensional legacy of Jesus, to remind us that spirit and matter are not opposites. They are complementary expressions of the same one. The 7 heavens that he traveled through did not distance him from the world. They prepared him to overflow light into this world. The Ascension did not remove him from earth. It made him present in all things. He became omnipresent not because he fled from density, but because he integrated it in pure love. True abundance, therefore, is not just material wealth. It's spiritual clarity. It's a peaceful heart. It's a lucid mind, a healthy body, genuine relationships, aligned purpose. It's living from the inside out, knowing that everything you need already resides within you, as potential, as code, as promise. And Jesus activated this code within himself to show us that the same can be done by anyone who chooses to walk this path with truth. When he says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you," he is revealing a spiritual formula. The kingdom is not geographical, it's vibrational. Seeking this kingdom is aligning oneself with Christ consciousness, living with coherence, love, presence. And all these things, that is, what's necessary to live with dignity, beauty, and fullness, naturally flow as a reflection of this vibration. Abundance is not the goal, it's the consequence. This legacy is cosmic because it is not limited to time, culture, or religion. It speaks to all souls who feel the call to return. Jesus taught us about heavens, but he also taught us to sow on earth. He spoke of the Father, but tenderly touched the children. He prayed in silence, but wept with those who suffered. This union between the invisible and the visible is the foundation of true spirituality, and it is in it that abundance manifests. Upon activating the body of light, upon traversing the heavens, upon awakening the inner kingdom, the human being becomes a channel, and through this channel flows not only revelation, but provision, creativity, synchronicity. Life ceases to be a struggle for survival and becomes a fertile field of accomplishment. This is what the masters call the Christic state, living with unified consciousness, being incarnated light, being living abundance. But this state requires commitment. It demands that we leave behind the role of victim, of spiritual orphan, of servant to fear. We need to assume the role of co-creators. And this is only possible when faith ceases to be a concept and becomes a constant vibrational field. When we stop repeating the words of Jesus and start living their spirit. When we stop worshiping the Christ outside and start activating the Christ within. Multidimensional abundance manifests when the seven heavens align within us, when our decisions vibrate with truth, when our feelings are no longer tied to scarcity, when our actions are in sync with the greater good. On this frequency, doors open, paths reveal themselves, and everything that seemed distant begins to approach with ease. Because the source never fails. It simply waits for us to align our antenna to its transmission. Jesus, then, is not just a master of the spirit. He is an archetype of full realization. He did not deny matter. He redeemed it. He did not despise the body. He transfigured it. He did not run from the world. He plunged into it with divine presence. This is the call. This is the legacy. To become beings who do not just walk on earth, but who bring heaven in their steps. And what do we do with this legacy now? We choose. We can continue as spectators of sacred history, applauding the feats of a master from 2,000 years ago. Or we can answer the call. We can activate our own codex, tread our seven heavens, and manifest the abundance that is our due. Not as a privilege, but as a mission. Because the world needs awakened beings. Because the earth cries out for embodied light. You are not small. You are not lost. You are not alone. The kingdom is within you, and the invitation has been made. It's up to you to say, yes. Mind Unfettered, now that we have journeyed together through the seven heavens and deciphered the Codex of Ascension, tell me in the comments, which part of Jesus' journey resonated most with your own inner journey? Have you ever felt that you've traversed one of these heavens, perhaps in a moment of pain, forgiveness, or profound awakening? Share with us. When you comment, you manifest. When you manifest, you anchor this frequency. And if you believe that this is the time for a group awakening, write down here, I manifest my ascension with the mind unfettered. Let's transform the comments into a field of light and conscious intention. This channel is more than a video space. It's a community vibrating high, united by the purpose of remembering who we truly are. And now, if you've felt the call, don't stop here. The next video is already on your screen. The Hidden Code of Sinai, the lost teaching of Jesus that could change the world. In it, we are going to reveal a hidden teaching that has been kept under the sands of Sinai for millennia, and that can expand even more everything we have explored so far. Click and continue this journey, Mind Unfettered. The journey is just beginning.